Welcome to this video. Today I am going to be talking about the 14 rules for the discernment of spirits, and I'm very excited about this topic. I've mentioned it briefly in a couple of my other videos and just how powerful and useful these 14 rules of discernment are. And somebody mentioned in my last video, I sent her the link to go check them out, and she mentioned that it was a little bit complicated and a little bit difficult to understand. So she gave me the idea, which I thought was a really great idea, to do this video today to spend some time going over each of the 14 rules and breaking them down and trying to just make them as simple and clear and understandable as possible, because they are really, really powerful when you do understand them. This is one of those things that when you learn it, you just realize that this is something that, again, is a universal spiritual experience, and it gives language to something that we all experience in the ups and downs of life. And when you understand the landscape of our spiritual interior life, it's just something that, once you learn it, you just can't help but think that everybody should know this and everybody needs to know this. So again, I hope that you guys get a lot out of this video today, and I am going to go ahead and pull up. I'm going to share my screen here, and for those of you who are joining me live or catching the replay, if you look in the description, I did post a link where you can download the 14 rules. This is a document that I just made for this stream today. One second here. So if you can see my screen, I have the 14 rules for the discernment of spirits. I put this together just for this video specifically today to, again, be able to share this with you all. So if you want to download it to be able to follow along as I go through this, feel free to do so. Or of course, if you want to just follow along as I go over it in the video, however you prefer to do this, but it is there in the description in case you do want to go back and review it, or even print it out and have it, be something that you can take notes on and highlight, or whatever you want to do with it. Feel free to use it as you please. So to start off, obviously the first question here is, what is the discernment of spirits? So basically, when we say discernment of spirits, what we're talking about here is the universal spiritual experience that everybody goes through. More specifically, it's the daily ups and downs of our spiritual life, and learning how to interpret our feelings and emotions as a way to discern God's will for our choices in life. And in doing so, and learning how to become more aware of what's actually happening and what spirits are, influencing us, then we can learn how to best respond to our alternating moods, how to thwart the plans of the enemy, and ultimately how to grow in union with our Lord. And so the objectives, the purpose of these rules is ultimately to increase our awareness and understanding of the different interior movements of our souls, to discern whether you are hearing the voice of God, the voice of the good spirit, or the voice of the enemy, aka the bad spirit. And so, again, in going over these rules, I really hope that this helps you understand your own spiritual experience and how to respond to those movements which come from the good spirit, which obviously you want to accept those, but then for the movements which are coming from the bad spirit, you are, wanting to reject those. And so, again, we'll get into a lot more detail of exactly how to do that, how to discern when it's coming from the good spirit versus a bad spirit. And ultimately, I do want to make a note here that the goal is not to be perfect, because, we're all imperfect. We're all going to make mistakes. We all have our, times when we fall, right? Even the just man falls 7 times a day. But the goal is not to be perfect, but to grow in our relationship with God. So those are the objectives for today. And Before I go over the key terms, I do also just want to let you guys know, for those of you who are catching the live stream right now, or for anybody who might be watching the replay, feel free to leave a comment. Again, if you're in the live chat, drop a comment in the chat. If you have any questions, if there's anything you want me to clarify, and I'll do my best to kind of keep my eye on the chat while I'm going through this, and either address them as I go through it or address the questions at the end. And then for those who are watching the replay, feel free to leave any comments or questions in the comment section, and I will do my best to get back to those and respond when I have a chance. But moving on to the key terms here. So some of the main terms we need to understand here: consolation. This is, a Christian term, but basically, consolation is anytime you feel a sense of God's love and closeness. It's a happy, warm, uplifting experience. It's when you're filled with a great joy and a strong desire to grow in your spiritual life. It is a grace. This is very important to understand. Consolation is a grace that God gives, and it's something that we need from time to time to strengthen us. And so if you don't feel God's love or closeness, if you are feeling discouraged, if you're feeling depressed, if you feel like you have little to no energy for prayer or spiritual life, then you are experiencing desolation. And it's important to understand that desolation does not come from God, but comes from Satan. God will never give you desolation. He may allow it, he may permit it, but it ultimately comes from Satan. And the last term here is tranquility. So this is for those times when you may feel neither discouraged, but also you're not feeling a great sense of joy. So you kind of just have this calm sense of peace. And those are still great times, really rich times to serve the Lord. Important note here, before we start to dive into the first rule, just wanted to make a note here about how important it is to understand that desolation is a universal spiritual experience. And anybody who is ever going through or experiencing desolation, again, those times of discouragement, those times when God feels like he might be distant from you, it's easy to fall into the trap of feeling ashamed, of feeling like something is wrong with you, of feeling like you're doing something wrong. And I just wanted to make this note that there's nothing wrong with you, and we should have no shame, and it should be no surprise when desolation comes, when times of desolation come, because again, it is a universal experience that everybody experiences, no matter who you are. Everybody goes through these ups and downs of life. And so these rules, what they're going to do is they're going to teach you what to do and what not to do when you are experiencing desolation, so that even in times of desolation, you can still use those times to experience great spiritual growth. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and jump into the first rule here. I'm just going to pause for a quick drink of water and jump into the first rule. So, rule 1 states basically, and also just to give a little bit of context here, again, these rules, actually, let me take a couple steps back for a second here. To kind of give a little bit of background on my knowledge of these rules, where I was first actually introduced to these rules was in a 10-week program I did shortly after my reversion back to the Catholic Church. And I did this 10-week program on the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola with Father Ed Broom at St. Peter Chanel Catholic Church in the Hawaiian Gardens. And so that was like a really deep dive where we covered pretty much the entirety of Ignatian spirituality, of which, the 14 rules for the discernment of spirits is one really big piece. And so we went into this pretty in-depth, And yeah, it was just a complete game changer for me when I first learned it then. And it's something that I've continued to use literally like in my everyday life, in my spiritual life. And then as I was putting together this document today, I kind of pulled together from a few different resources online. I also watched a video. There was one other really good video I found on YouTube with Father Timothy Timothy, I think it's Gallagher, if I'm might be mispronouncing his name or messing up his last name, but Father Timothy with Christopher West on the Theology of the Body channel. And I actually have the links to all of the sources that I used to put this document together. It's at the end of this document on page 7. And so, again, for those who might just be joining us live right now, the link is in the description of this video where you can download this. And it'll take you to this page here, and then just click 14 rules for the discernment of spirits, and that will open up the document we're going over right now. So moving forward, just wanted to share that context. And again, this was kind of my version of the 14 rules, kind of pulling together from all those different resources and trying to share this in a way that's as clear and as understandable as possible. So the first rule states that, or basically is describing how the two spirits operate in a person who is far from God. So basically, when a person is far from God and moving further away from God, aka somebody who's living a life of serious sin, then the bad spirit fills their imagination with images of sensual pleasures in order to give you a false peace, and so as to get the person to continue moving further away from God. Meanwhile, the good spirit stings and bites in the person's conscience, taking away your peace so as to call the person back to God. In other words, if you are living in sin without repentance or a desire to change your ways, then basically the bad spirit will deceive you with a false sense of peace to try to get you to continue falling into sin so that you become a slave to your passions and addictions. And on the flip side, the good spirit will use the reverse method and will prick your conscience. It will make you feel guilty, in other words, so as to correct your path and call you back to living the way that God intended you to. And so this is really important to understand, because this breaks a common myth, which is that if you feel peace, then it must be God's will. But that's not always true. It can be true, it might be true, but it's not always true, as is explained in this first rule. And so it really just depends on where a person is, right? If you are a person, which I would imagine that most people who are watching this video, chances are you are probably somebody who is already moving towards God, which will get us to rule number 2. But for anybody, again, who is living in sin, who is not close to God, then again, that's what rule 1 explains. So moving to rule 2, this is when, again, if the direction changes, if you have, repented of your past sins, and of course, again, we're all imperfect humans and we all fall and we all continue to sin. But if you are moving ever closer to God and you're trying to avoid sin and love the Lord to the best of your ability, then what happens is the bad spirit now is going to attempt to discourage you by creating obstacles, by troubling you with false understandings of things, and having you fall into scrupulosity and blowing things out of proportion, etc. Meanwhile, the good spirit is going to do the opposite now, right? And give you courage, give you strength, give you inspiration, and other good consolations so as to encourage and ease the path forward. So in other words, the method of the good spirit and the bad spirit reverses in rule number 2 compared to rule number 1. So again, just to recap here, the bad spirit, whereas previously in rule number 1 gives you a false sense of spirit, now, a false sense of peace. Now it discourages and does whatever it can to create obstacles and take away your peace, because of course the bad spirit is trying to keep you away from God. On the other hand, now the good spirit, whereas previously it was taking away your peace, now it's going to encourage and do whatever it can to remove obstacles and to give you peace. So I hope that makes sense. Again, these first 2 rules are really, really important to understand, again, that the way that the spirits operate depends on where you are in relation to God. And again, this breaks the common myth that just because you feel peace, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is God's will. You have to, again, discern based on whether or not you are in a state of grace or whether you are living in sin, or as the Catholic Church would say, whether you are going from mortal sin to mortal sin, or if you are in a state of grace. So I hope that's clear. Again, let me know if you guys have any questions. If there's anything that's unclear, happy to try to clarify any additional questions around those first 2 rules. But moving on to rule number 3, the definition of spiritual consolation. So basically this rule is just providing the definition of spiritual consolation. And it says that consolation is when some interior movement is caused in the soul through which the soul becomes inflamed with love of its creator and Lord. Likewise, when it sheds tears that move to love of its Lord, whether it's out of sorrow for your sins or for the passion of Christ, or because of anything else directly ordered to God's service and praise. And finally, consolation is every increase of hope, faith, and charity, and all interior joy that related to heavenly things and to the salvation of one's soul. So in other words, when your heart finds joy in God, a sense of God's closeness and love, you are experiencing spiritual consolation. And during these times, what you want to do, of course, is open up your heart and give thanks to the Lord for giving you this grace. All right. Moving on to rule number 4. So rule 4 is the definition of spiritual desolation. And it says that desolation is all the contrary of the 3rd rule, such as darkness of soul, disturbance in it, movement to low and earthly things, disturbance from various agitations and temptations, moving to lack of confidence, without love, finding oneself totally slothful, tepid, sad, and as if separated from one's creator and Lord. Desolation often comes with thoughts of feeling disoriented and like nobody understands you, and often will tempt you to want to throw in the towel and give up. In other words, when your heart is discouraged, when you have little energy for spiritual things, when temptations increase and God feels far away, you are experiencing spiritual desolation. And when these times arise, what you want to do is resist and reject the enemy's tactic. And the first step to doing that is to be aware of it, right? To name it, to claim it, and then you will be able to tame it. And we'll get into in the next few rules here how exactly to go about doing that. So rule number 5 is all about what not to do, in desolation. So when you are in spiritual desolation, never change anything in your spiritual life. For example, if you say the rosary every day, then you want to keep saying the rosary every day, no matter how you feel. Whatever your spiritual practices or plans are, make no changes during times of desolation. Very simple, very clear, no exceptions here. This is how you will get safely through any spiritual darkness that you may ever experience. And for most people, this is the primary obstacle on the spiritual journey, is making poor decisions when we are in spiritual desolation. And we have to understand that the enemy is always going to try to attack us when we are in desolation. And so the key is to, again, defend yourself against his tactics and not let him win, which leads us to rule number 6, which is 4 ways to fight back against desolation. So when you are in spiritual desolation, you want to use these 4 tools to fight back against it. Number 1 is prayer, asking for God's help. Number 2 is meditation. You can contemplate on Bible verses, truths about God's faithful love, memories of God's fidelity to you in the past. Number 3 is examination. You want to reflect and ask yourself, how did this start? And number 4 is penance. So instead of just giving in and immersing yourself in social media and music, movies, distractions, etc., you want to stand your ground, right? Again, instead of the tendency when we are in these periods of discouragement and feeling a lack of energy or motivation, it's so easy to just fall into, again, mindless scrolling on social media. I know I'm definitely guilty of this at times. And instead, though, again, we want to resist it. We want to increase our prayer. We want to increase our fasting, whether that's fasting from food or fasting from, again, any distractions, whether it be social media or movies or whatever it is that we may be using as a method to escape and to distract ourselves. Again, instead we want to pray and ask God for his help and trust in God's grace to get us through this time of desolation, knowing that God always gives the grace for the first step. So when you are feeling small and weak and helpless, all you have to do is take that first small step in the right direction and more grace will follow. All right, so rule number 7 is the rule of sufficient grace. And basically what this rule says is that when you are in spiritual desolation, know that you will get out, and God is giving you all the grace you need to get safely through this desolation. And again, you want to go back to rule number 6 and utilize those 4 tools we just talked about to fight against the desolation. When in desolation, remember this is within God's loving providence. He permits it so that as we resist, we grow in our ability to resist. Know that the Lord is really with you and has given you enough grace to resist agitations and temptations from the enemy. This is a test for you. Trust that the Lord is near and has given you enough grace, even if you don't feel it, for eternal salvation. Keep calling out to him. So again, even though it may not feel like it, we have to trust during these times of desolation that the Lord, again, although this, the desolation does not come from the Lord, it only comes from the enemy, but God has allowed it, he has permitted it, so that we can grow through it, right? It comes from a loving reason. So anything that God allows, it's only for our own good. And so we have to trust, and this rule again is saying is trust that God will never allow something to happen. God will never allow us to fall into desolation without having enough grace to get through it. He will always provide enough grace to get through that period of desolation. So rule 8 says, rule 8 is to be patient and you will get out. So when you are in spiritual desolation, you want to be patient, you want to stay the course, and remember that consolation will return much sooner than the desolation is telling you. So when we're in desolation, right, often what will keep us stuck there and cause us to fall into deeper despair is believing this lie that this is just going to keep going on and on and on indefinitely, and that we're never going to get out of it, right? That's how it feels when we're going through it. But this is a lie, and it's important to remember this, that even though it doesn't feel like it, the truth is that consolation will come back a lot sooner than desolation wants you to believe. All right, so rule number 9 is why God permits desolation in the first place, right? So the question, of course, is why does God, who loves us and who loves us, allow us to experience desolation? And the reason is because it's one of 3 reasons. So the first reason, it could be to help us see changes that we need to make. And so this would mean that the desolation is our own fault, but God is allowing it. Meaning, again, we've slipped on our spiritual practices, on our prayer life. Perhaps we've been giving into temptations or whatever it is, and so as a result of our actions, we can start to fall into a period of desolation, and God may allow that. The second reason that God may permit desolation is to strengthen us in our resistance to desolation. So in this case, and this is, I think, often the case where, we can really start to spiral in our minds. Basically, what it's saying is that sometimes desolation is not our fault, right? Sometimes you're doing everything right, and this sense of discouragement and despair or anxiety or whatever it is can seemingly come out of nowhere. And in that case, right, this rule is reminding us that sometimes desolation is not your fault, but God is allowing it, He's permitting it in order to test us, in order to test you, and to give you the opportunity to grow in your faith and to grow in your dependence on Him. So that's the second reason. The third reason why sometimes God may permit desolation is simply to help us not get complacent in the spiritual life. In other words, to protect us from pride. So, desolation is always a tactic of the enemy. Again, just as a reminder, but God does allow us to have desolation because if we reject it and if we are discerning, then we can experience tremendous growth through it, right? I think we all know this, on some level, we've experienced this, that, the difficult times where we, manage to keep trusting in God, when we manage to rely on the Lord, to stop relying on ourselves, but to fall to our knees and to, pray to God in a way that we've never prayed before because we're facing some sort of darkness that we've never faced before, right? It's in those times of darkness that we can experience tremendous growth in our spiritual life. And so, while some growth does come from the joys of spiritual consolation, there's some growth that can only come from the struggle of spiritual desolation. And so, again, we need to remember, I know this has been a huge lesson for me recently, that spiritual consolation is a grace given by God, and He wants us to realize that consolation is a gift and a grace from Him, and that we did not achieve it. Again, this keeps us humble. It protects us from pride, and helps us to be grounded in the truth and the reality that every good consolation, every period, every movement movement of our soul that stirs up joy and hope and peace and faith and all those good feelings and good emotions are always only gifts and graces from God. They are not a result of anything that we do. And so sometimes, again, God will let us experience these periods of desolation to remind us of that and to keep us humble, because otherwise, as I know I experienced when I was lost in the New Age spirituality, and I think a lot of people in New Age who have come out of New Age can also relate to this, is you get, if you believe that you are the one who's the the creator of your experiences and of your enlightenment and of your spiritual superiority, you start to become spiritually prideful, right? You start to become arrogant, and that pride is of the enemy, right? That pride is ultimately a huge liability, and so God wants to protect us from that. And that's again another reason why God can sometimes allow us to experience spiritual desolation. Annie says, desolation here. Thinks I need this right when I tuned in too. Glad you showed up. Awesome. So glad to have you here, Annie, and thank you for tuning in. Annie's actually the one who inspired this video, as I mentioned at the beginning of the live stream. She had commented in the last video, sharing that she wanted to learn more about this, the 14 rules for the discernment of spirits, and I sent her the link to the rules, and she was saying to me that it was a little bit complicated and difficult to understand. So again, props to Annie, and thank you, Annie, again for the suggestion and the inspiration to do this video today. And I really hope that this helps you and everybody else who's tuning into this video today. So moving on to rule number 10. When in consolation, prepare for desolation. So again, going back to this theme of humility, right? When you are in spiritual consolation, remember that desolation will return at some point. And so you want to prepare for that, right? So instead of letting desolation catch you off guard, when you are in the joy of consolation, that's the time to store up your strength and get your spiritual arrows ready, so to speak, and to start to think about how you're going to act when desolation comes again. This way, when it does come, it doesn't throw you off the way it would otherwise. Now, of course, it still is not going to be easy, right? Desolation is never easy. Feeling distant from God, feeling discouraged, feeling, all the negative, dark things that we feel when we're going through desolation is never easy. But again, this is the power of the 14 rules given to us here by St. Ignatius, is that they give us a language to describe what's happening. And when you can describe what's happening and you can name it and claim it and identify it, there's a level of peace that comes with that, right? Because now you understand again what's happening, right? You kind of can perceive the enemy's tactics against you, and you know how to respond and how not to respond. All right, so moving on to rule number 11. When in consolation, humble yourself. Remember the desolation. So again, just a deeper dive into kind of what we started touching on in the previous rule. But this rule, really what this rule is doing is describing, giving us a portrait of what the mature person of discernment looks like. And so it says the mature person of discernment is neither carelessly high in consolation nor despairingly low in desolation, but instead a person of mature discernment is humble in consolation and trusting in desolation. So when you are in consolation, be humble. Remember again that this is a gift from God. This is not something that you achieved. And so for that reason, thank God for this grace. Lower yourself as much as you can, remembering how you felt in desolation and thinking of how little you are capable in the time of desolation without such grace or consolation. So again, when you're experiencing the joys and the peace of consolation, when everything is going well and you feel energized and motivated to grow in your spiritual life, don't get too high on your horse, right? Keep yourself humble and remember how you felt when you were in desolation, right? Remember how incapable you felt of doing anything when you were in desolation and how desperately you needed God, right? So again, now that God is blessing you and gracing you with consolation, be grateful to God. Remember that you did not do this, but God gave this gift to you. And so stay humble. And then again, when you're in desolation, so Annie, who said she's currently in desolation, and anybody else who's currently in desolation, trust in God and know that, again, He has given you sufficient grace to resist the enemy, right? Again, going back to rule number 7, the rule of sufficient grace. God will never allow you to go through desolation without giving you the grace that you need to get through it. So, remember that He has given you sufficient grace to resist the enemy, and think that you can do much with God's sufficient grace to resist all of your enemies and take strength in your Creator and Lord. Again, this is the purpose of God allowing you to go through desolation, is so that you can continue to rely on the Lord and not on yourself, right? He's giving you this opportunity to increase your dependence and your reliance on Him and not yourself. All right, rule number 12. The enemy is weaker than you think. Okay, I love this rule so much because I think I've even, I believe I've said in one of my other videos, I don't remember which one right now, but I know I've potentially been guilty of giving the enemy more power than he deserves. And this rule number 12, explains why the enemy is actually weaker than we might think. And it says, the evil spirit is like a weak, insecure bully. He is strong with the weak, so he can be strong, but only in proportion to our own weakness. So it says he is strong with the weak, but weak with the strong. And so you must confront him head on and be firm to oppose him. If you do this, then he will back off. But if you do not, then he will take advantage of your weakness, right? This is exactly how a weak, insecure bully operates. A bully picks on the weak kid, right? A bully picks on somebody who's smaller than him. And so if you show your weakness, then the bully, aka the enemy, will take advantage of that. But if you are firm in your opposition, if you resist him head on, then because he only has power in the face of weakness, then now he essentially becomes powerless, right? And so the enemy is fundamentally weak compared to Christ and Christ's grace in us. And so again, stand firm and forcefully resist the enemy's temptations right at their very beginning. This is key, right? It's at the very beginning when you first sense or first become aware of a temptation. This is when it's easiest, right, to resist the temptation. And you will save yourself a lot of struggle if you resist it firmly and forcefully right at the beginning. Right. And so a pro tip I put here is that as soon as you're aware of a temptation, pray a fervent Hail Mary. This is something that I do all the time, and it works like a charm. Every single time I become aware of of a temptation starting to form in my mind, I immediately, really fervently, close my eyes and just start to pray, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And just like that, the enemy flees in the opposite direction. Obviously, I know my Protestant brothers and sisters might have some hesitation to the Hail Mary prayer, but for those of you who are Catholic, or just, I know there's some Protestants out there who do understand the veneration that we give to Mother Mary as the Mother of God, as the one who brought Jesus into this world, and therefore the one who is closest to Jesus. And so through Mary, right, we have, and Mary, of course, as scripture tells us, crushes the head of Satan. And so that's why, praying the Hail Mary is one of the easiest, quickest ways to immediately, as soon as you have a temptation, to stand up against the evil spirit. All right. So again, let me know if you guys have any questions, if this is all making sense, if this is helping you make more sense of your experiences, of your spiritual desolations and consolations. And yeah, again, just don't let the enemy convince you. We touched on this in the earlier rule about when you're in desolation, don't make any changes in your spiritual life, right? So if you had committed to praying at a certain time, if you had committed to going to mass or going to confession or going or whatever the spiritual commitment is that you made, but now that you're in desolation and you're starting to think, well, I don't really feel like it, and so maybe I'm just not going to do it, or I'm not going to go, or I'll go tomorrow, or I'll do it next week. Pause, right? That's the moment to catch what's happening, to say, wait a minute, right? Wait a minute. The enemy is trying to take me off course, right? And so that moment is a moment, right? Every temptation is an opportunity for grace. And so if you can catch it in that moment and name it for what it is and decide, even though you don't feel like it, that you're going to do what you said you were going to do before you got into desolation, right? Do what you said you were going to do when you were in consolation. As soon as you do that, then the enemy is undone, right? Immediately, the enemy's plans are just completely destroyed. So that's rule 12. Rule 13, another really important rule, and we're down to the last two rules here. Rule 13 is to break the silence. So when you are in desolation, it's so important that you find a wise, competent, spiritual person and talk about it, right? Because the evil spirit conducts himself as a false lover in wishing to remain secret and not be revealed. And so what you want to do is reveal it, right? Reveal the secret evil thoughts, the temptations and problems that you're facing to a good confessor or to another holy confidant, right? Those people, anybody who knows how the enemy works, because they will help you point it out and again see what's happening, right? They'll even just the very act of sharing with someone, like, hey, I'm in desolation. I've experienced this personally, right? Just saying that to someone who you trust, who again has spiritual wisdom, who can offer you some comfort, or just even say, I'll pray for you, whatever it is. There's so much, sometimes that's all it takes to break you out of it. And other times you may not even be aware, you still may not have caught that the fact that you're in desolation, and you're just so lost in your head and anxiety or whatever is happening, and you haven't even named it yet. But in starting to talk to somebody about it right now, whether it's a friend or a priest or a spiritual director, whoever it is, if they can point it out to you and say, hey, it sounds like you're in spiritual desolation, right? Sometimes that, right, hearing it from someone else is enough to now, again, give you the awareness and then now the tools, right, going back to these 14 rules to know how to respond, to know what action to take or what action not to take, right? So it says, to finish up this rule, the enemy wants you to stay silent. The enemy wants you to suffer in silence and to not say anything to anyone, right? We all know this to be true, right? As soon as we start to hide and isolate ourselves, and this was exactly what I did um, when I was in high school. Um, Shortly after I got confirmed in the Catholic Church. And again, I was just thinking about this because I'm about to go give a talk tonight to confirmation teens, and um, and this was the problem, was that I had all these questions and temptations, and as a shy, introverted, insecure high school teenager, I didn't talk to anybody, right? I kept it all inside. And when you do that, again, you're giving the enemy power, right? When you don't talk to anybody and you suffer in silence, you are going to lose that battle. And that's what happened to me, right? I just kept going further and further and further away from God, um, because I didn't talk to anybody. And so again, what you want to do is the opposite, right? If the enemy wants you to stay silent, then do the opposite and say something. More specifically, say the thing you don't want to say, right? If you really want your meeting with a spiritual direction, with a spiritual director or any wise spiritual person to be really, really, really helpful, then say the thing that you don't want to say, right? Share that evil thought or temptation that, again, is not coming from you. It's coming from the enemy. But if you don't share it with somebody, again, who you trust, a holy, confident, somebody who again has spiritual wisdom, who can help you, uh, you know, confirm that this is from the enemy, then you can start to think that these are your thoughts, right? So often we don't even distinguish the voices in our head. We don't distinguish, is this a good spirit or a bad spirit? And again, that's what these rules are all about, is to be able to discern which spirits are influencing you. And so when you can find people to open up to, that can just be so incredibly helpful. And whatever you do, again, do not isolate yourself. All right, rule number 14, the final rule here, is to know your kryptonite. So it says to identify and reinforce the area of your life where you are most vulnerable to the enemy's temptations and discouraging lies. The evil spirit will always attack you in your weakest spots. We all have weak spots. So what you need to do is pay attention to your patterns of weakness, identify them, and then work to strengthen those areas so that you can defend yourself against them, and defend yourself from falling victim to the enemy's attacks. This is something that's been really, really helpful, really, really fruitful for me recently. During Lent, I did this exercise that's called the root sin exercise that I got from Dan Burke. If anybody's interested in it, let me know. Drop a comment saying root sin exercise, and I'll send you the link to do that exercise. It's completely free. It is a bit of a lengthy process. So I recommend doing it at a time, set some time aside, set a holy hour aside to, basically the purpose of the exercise is to identify what your root sin, or in other words, your primary sin is. And so there's three main root sins, which are pride, vanity, and sensuality. And so it basically has a bunch of different exercises to help you identify which one is your primary sin that you fall into. And again, for me, doing that exercise, it helped me identify my weak spot. And I made a plan of action with specific, concrete things to look out for and to be aware of, and to be working on. And so this again something I did during Lent, and ever since then have been strengthening those areas and defending myself from the enemy's temptations and lies in these areas, right? Because again, these are the areas where I have a tendency, it's a pattern for me to fall into these temptations and lies. And so again, if you're interested, if you want that, just drop a comment, say root sin exercise, and I will send you the link for that. But that's the final rule. And again, just to summarize, the purpose of these rules. And I did actually want to make a comment on this earlier, and I forgot to. I think, the word rules, perhaps in the past had more of a tendency, I know for me at least, for sure, to have a negative connotation, as something that's perhaps restricting or limiting. I think it's, that comes from this modern, secular atheistic worldview of individual freedom and doing whatever you want to do and following your heart. And so that liberation from all rules and limitations, I think is where that negative connotation could come from. But again, as you can see, these rules are designed to empower you, right? They're designed to give you the tools, the awareness, the understanding on how to navigate your spiritual life, the ups and downs of daily life, right? And again, everybody goes through these ups and downs, right? This is the daily, universal spiritual experience that everybody goes through. And so again, these, amazing, powerful, practical rules came from Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who just so happened to be a Catholic saint. But I think, again, anybody who took the time to hear me out and go through all 14 rules with me today, I think you can see, like, again, these rules, I think, could help anybody. And yeah, I really do feel like, again, when I learned these, I was like, man, how did I never learn this before? Like, I wish I had learned this, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so again, I really hope that this helps you and supports you. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. Please do me a favor and like this video if you haven't already. That way more people can see this video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed to my channel. And again, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. Drop a comment below, and I'll get back to the questions as soon as I have a chance. Please keep me in your prayers tonight, as I'm going to be giving a talk and sharing my testimony for some confirmation teens later tonight. And I think that's it for now. Let me just make sure there wasn't anything else I wanted to cover. Yeah, I think that's it. Again, I pray that these 14 rules are useful and helpful in your spiritual journey moving forward. And thank you guys for tuning in and for watching, and for again, just all the thoughtful comments and questions and suggestions. I really really enjoying being on this journey with you all, and just continuing to learn and grow with you all. So thank you all, and God bless you, and I will see you in the next video.